Today I am in the Rose Hill Burial Park and Mausoleum in Ashland, Kentucky. This is a huge cemetery. It is probably the biggest cemetery in Boyd County or the Ashland area. And we are up here on top of this mountain in Ashland, Kentucky. This huge cemetery because I have a Hatfield revelation. If any of you have Preacher Ann's Hatfield in your family tree, I am sure that you are missing some of the descendants of Preacher Ann's that aren't listed. So the other day I took you to the Colton Cemetery and showed you where Angeline Smith Lockhart Hatfield was buried. And today we're in the Rose Hill Cemetery because I am going to show you the three children of Angeline Smith and Madison Hatfield. I have Mollie. This was their youngest child. This was Angeline's youngest child with Madison Hatfield. Then if you walk diagonal this way, we're going to go over here and I'm going to show you how close Mollie's brother is buried to her. Then you have the grave of Roland Thomas Hatfield, who was the middle child of Angeline and Matt Hatfield. And remember I told you that Matt Hatfield was the brother of Preacher Ann's Hatfield, and he was married and had 3 children with Angeline out of wedlock. His other, their oldest son, Grover, if you look really close where the bell tower is up there, to the right of that bell tower is Grover's grave. He's up there all by himself with no relatives buried around him at all. So I don't know why he ended up there all by himself, away from his siblings. Maybe he just wanted to be in that plot. But I want to talk about Mollie today. If you have a Hatfield tree, this is your Hatfield revelation. Because I have been through several trees on Ancestry to where I haven't saw Mollie, Grover, and Roland in the trees. But there's also the fact that Mollie, in 1912, she has a daughter. And she had a daughter named Magdalene. And Magdalene's buried right above Mollie. Magdalene and her husband Alonzo Gray. If you go to the census, Mollie's listed with her children. It would be the 1920 census. Right before she married Joe Collins. She's listed as single or widowed, actually, because she was widowed from her first husband, who was Arson Ratliff. Well, you'll see Mollie and Maggie, who is Magdalene, and then another son, Roland, who is Arthur Roland Ratliff. But Magdalene's listed as a Ratliff in the 1920 census. But when you go and you find Magdalene's obituary in the Ashland Daily News, she was actually the daughter of Ranson Hatfield. She was born in 1912. Mollie didn't marry Arson Ratliff until around 1914, so she already had Magdalene. And who was Ranson Hatfield? Which Ranson Hatfield was her father? The Ranson Hatfield, who was Magdalene's father, was none other than the son of Preacher Ann's Hatfield, who was also Mollie's uncle. So Mollie Hatfield and Ransom Hatfield, who were first cousins, had a daughter named Magdalene in 1912. And she went by Sue. Sometimes she went by Maggie. And then Mollie marries Orson Ratliff and has a son, Arthur Roland Ratliff. And Orson died in 1919, I think in a slate fall in the mines. And then Mollie goes on to marry Joseph Carlos Collins. So if you have any Collins connections in the Pike County, Mingo County area, Joe Collins is probably in your tree. He had a sister named Sarah who married John Ratliff. And his mother was actually Ingabo Varney. And it's a weird name. It's Ingabo Varney was her maiden name. So she married Joe Collins in around 1920, after the census was already taken. She marries Joe Collins, and they end up having 6 kids. So the Collins children that Mollie had were Sadie was one, Pauline, but there was Glenn. There were 6 children that she had with Joseph, who they called Joe. And in 1935, Mollie and Joe were at a Christmas Eve party. So it was the 24th of December in 1935. They were in Varney at a dance hall. And of course, I'm sure Joe was getting inebriated. Perhaps Mollie was too, who knows? No one really knows what happened except for the people who were there. And of course, they're all gone, so we can't ask them. So Joe and Mollie are at this party, at this Christmas party. And Joe gets angered with Mollie. And Joe is an abusive man. He drags her into another room in the house and he hits her. Later on, he passes out in the bed between 2 friends. I'm assuming the friends were female. I'm going by the newspaper article of what happened that night. And Mollie shoots her husband in the head twice while he lay in the bed between 2 friends. When she went to court in Williamson in Mingo County on May the 16th of 1936, she says that she doesn't remember shooting him. So she didn't remember shooting Joe, she said. Their son Glenn is 10 years old. He's brought into the court. He's been ill. They actually bring him into the court on a cot, is what the article said. And he testifies in his mother's behalf that Joe Collins was abusive to her since their marriage in 1920. And at the age of 42, on May the 16th, 1936, in Williamson, Mingo County Court, Mollie Collins is acquitted of the murder of her husband, Joseph Carlos Collins. Shortly afterwards, she brings her children and she moves here to Ashland, Kentucky. This little town that sits right here nestled on the river, where her mother and her brothers had lived since 1920. She leaves Mingo County and she leaves Joe there in Varney, where he's buried, and she comes here to Ashland. Ashland is about 2 or 2.5 hours away. I know it's 2 hours away from Matewan. And this is where she settles with her children. And this is where Magdalene marries Alonzo Gray. And this is where Mollie lives until 1954, when she died. And she ended up here in the Rose Hill Burial Park. So she murdered her husband, was acquitted, brought her children here to live with her mother and her brothers, to establish a new life in Ashland, Kentucky. And because Mollie, Roland, Grover, and Magdalene were all born out of wedlock, they're still Hatfields, and they still should be in your family tree. This is my Hatfield revelation up here on the mountain in Ashland, Kentucky at the Rose Hill Burial Park. So be sure to like and subscribe. Add these Hatfields to your family tree. And if you have anybody that's your brick wall in your tree that you can't find, or just someone you want me to investigate, find their grave, try to find their obituary, just let me know. I'd be glad to do that for you. Be sure to like and subscribe.